Okay, so this one's called The Value Transferred by the Machinery to the Product. As it suggests, that's pretty much what it's going to be talking about in this section. So, I'm cracking up book real fast. Pages is 5. All right, so he starts out talking a little bit here about like he's talking about some natural forces here, water wheels, steam engines, all that fun stuff, magnets. How do they work? All that jazz. As basically like things that capitalism or capitalists specifically can exploit um, without having to pay for them, which is pretty nice. Um, so he's kind of introduced the topic a little bit. It says rather does the tool expand and multiply, changing from a dwarf implement of the human organism to the implement of a mechanism created by man. Capital now sets the worker to work not with just a manual tool, but with the machine, which itself handles the tools. Therefore, although it is clear at the first glance that large-scale industry raises the productivity of labor to an extraordinary degree by incorporating into the production process both the immense forces of nature and the results arrived at by science, it is by no means equally clear that this increase in productive force is not, on the other hand, purchased with an increase in the amount of labor expended. So he's sort of setting up this idea that a lot of this chapter deals with, which is that large scale industry and more productivity does not necessarily lead to more downtime or leisure time as you might expect it to. A rational organization of the economy, but
Book club. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Yes, this is book club. I'm gonna cut that sound bite out and just put it right in the beginning of the video if I remember to do it. Just book club. Okay. Yeah. Okay. Here we go. So first principle here to think about in this section, arguably the main takeaway, I guess, is that machines, um, they do not add more value than it loses on average by depreciation. So these machines, being themselves products of human labor and such, have some amount of value. They have some vaguely quantifiable amount of value, um, and it basically is deteriorated or sort of depreciated over time as it gets used. Because at the end of its life cycle, however long that might be, or however intensive that might be, um, machine is going to eventually break down or just become obsolete. Both of those would basically qualify as like the end of the life for the machine, and it would get retired, um, and not be very useful anymore. Um, and so basically, it starts out with the most value it's ever going to have, and then every time you use it, it will transfer some of that value. It says here, he says, hence, there's a great difference between the value machine and the value transferred in a given time by the machine to the product. Um, so I guess each transference of value might be small, but it'll add up eventually. It says equally, there's a great difference between the machine as a factor in the formation of value and a factor in the formation of the product. The longer the period during which the machine serves in the same labor process, the greater are those differences. It is no doubt true, as we have seen, that every instrument of labor enters as a whole into the labor process, while only the piecemeal and proportion to its average daily depreciation in the process of valorization. So that amount of value that gets transferred into the product when you use your tools or use your machines is calculated into the final price, or in other words, the process of valorization. So, and capitalists usually have a pretty good idea of that, what that value equates to. In other words, I might be a little. I mean, as someone who's actually had a class on like how materials deteriorate over time, and how mechanisms eventually break. Like they call it stress testing. Usually, it's it's a little bit of science and a little bit of speculation. In other words, it's very probability based. So I get what Marx is saying, that once the machine is retired, it's taken off the line. You can look back retrospectively and say, "Oh, how much value did it add?" Well, that was pretty much how much value it started with. And I think most capitalists would think the same way. Is that like, oh, if I bought this machine for $100,000, then I'm expecting to get $100,000 of value back out of it. So that's essentially the idea here. So the only problem is that or one thing that I don't know if Marx really explains in this chapter is that usually you don't know how long a machine will last until it breaks. I guess. You can look on like I don't know, the warranty or something, and it roughly calculate like how long is this expected to last. Usually, I mean, in actual engineering terms, that's usually an estimate, or they'll give a range or something like that, right? Like, oh, it'll last anywhere from like 1 to 1.1 million cycles or something like that. So as a as a capitalist, you might be like, well, okay, so what, do you divide $100,000 by 1.1 million, and that's roughly how much value it adds to the product, like it piecemeal. So I guess it's just like a simple correlation that Marx is using. It's definitely it's an oversimplification, but it's a simplification that gets the job done, right? That's how I think of it. So yeah, I think if there are any issues with it, and I think there are some minor ones, it's sort of like, it's not breaking anything, I guess. Okay. Jump ahead slightly here. He says, when we considered cooperation and manufacture, we found that certain general conditions of production, such as buildings, could be consumed more economically than the scattered conditions of production of city craftsmen, because they could be consumed in common, and that they therefore made the product cheaper. The system of machinery not only is the framework of the machine consumed in common by its numerous working parts, but the prime mover, together with a part of the transmitting mechanism, is consumed in common by a large number of operating machines. Now, I think the general takeaway here, and we talked about this in the earlier Euro meetings slightly, is this idea of like, what are the differences between the earlier manufacturing period and handicrafts, and what Marx considers, a higher stage than that, which is the big, large-scale industry, highly mechanized factories and stuff like that. So he's giving one answer here. Has to generally answer that question. So the one thing has to do with basically taking what was scattered conditions of production, is what he calls it, right? Isolated craftsmen, and compressing them into in one area, one space, which would be the factory, more or less, or maybe just a huge workshop. Um, but one of the nice consequences, if you're a capitalist, is that now all your machines are in one spot, so they can all use the same prime mover, which I would just interpret as like power source. Like it could be electrical. Uh, Nowadays it probably would be, but it could also mean, uh, if you're next to a like large water mill and the water mill is what's driving all the machines, then all of them are running on the same engine or the same energy source, and that can be exploited in common, uh, as well as all the machines are hooked up to the same power source, which is also pretty nice. It makes this compression in space much easier, which ends up saving money usually. Let's see. I didn't have a ton of notes in this section because I don't know if anyone felt differently, but like the point he was trying to get across in this one was pretty simple. There's not a whole lot to it. Kind of just say, okay, yep, that makes sense. That's yeah. It's one more time. Oh, okay, yeah, yeah. I wanted to read this part too because this is like a consequence of that. Okay, he says in the older countries, machinery itself, when employed in some branches of industry, creates a superfluity of labor. He says Ricardo calls it redundancy. In other branches, that the fall of wages below the value of labor power impedes the use of machinery in those other branches, and from the standpoint of the capitalist, makes the use of machinery superfluous, often impossible because its profit comes from a reduction in the labor paid for, not in the labor employed. So, interesting point, and I think this is also pretty logical deduction that um, one instance in which a capitalist would actually not upgrade to like large scale machinery or machinery at all is in those situations where the machines are actually more expensive than just a bunch of people that could also do the work for like ridiculously low wages. Um, and I think this is what David Harvey is talking about when he said that like Marx spent a lot of time analyzing the Manchester like factory systems, and because that's where he was, and he sort of interpreted that as the what would become the dominant um and I was gonna say mode of production, but that's too broad. Like that's how production would look. Basically, it would look like huge factories, jam packed full of people. And I think he would be right on in some cases, but as David Harvey points out, in other cases, there are definitely still like sweatshops in the world where that would be actually more similar to I think what Harvey calls like the Birmingham model, because Birmingham, um, that it was essentially what you would call like a sweatshop model, where you have a bunch of people working smaller machines by themselves. Now, on like there are, and each person's working on one product basically, um, and you still get the benefit of exploiting, like of I should say, like saving money by them all being in one building. So you only have to pay for one building. You only have to pay one electricity bill, um, and yeah, it scales more nicely when they're all literally crammed into a sweatshop like that. But um, I think what Marx says here is at least giving some credence to that model. Basically, if replacing that human labor with a machine would actually end up costing you more money, then like you wouldn't do it. It's just as simple as that. And like he says, your profit's coming from a reduction in the labor you're paying for, not in the labor employed. And you think about it, right? Machines were also made by people's labor earlier. So you're still paying for that labor in the form of buying a machine. And the entire point of buying a machine is to replace human labor because human might cost too much. But hey, if the human labor is cheap, then screw it. And I think this still happens, by the way, when you have capital flight from so-called first world countries and all that, where they're like, oh, um, you know, for one reason or another, the employing labor in this country is too expensive, and that means we could either invest in a bunch of new research and technology and new machines, better machines, whatever, to make up for the fact that we have to pay our higher wages, or we can, have production done somewhere else on the planet where wages are way lower, and then we don't even need to buy machinery. Just find cheaper labor, and that tends to happen quite a bit. So, yeah, Marx is kind of pointing out one of the reasons, that capital is constantly looking for not just more labor to exploit, but preferably the cheapest labor to exploit. And I guess right at the end here, is another note. Although the next section has more detail on this. He says that for example, the labor of women and children under 10 years old was forbidden in mines, and the capitalists considered the employment of naked women and girls, often accompanied with men, so far sanctioned by their moral code, and especially by their ledgers, that it was only after the passing of the act that they had recourse to machinery. So, in other words, right, the labor of women and children was so cheap that they were like, screw it, we'll hire them to work in mines because we know that the children yearn for the mines. That's why they play Minecraft. But
how things change, how they stay the same, huh?
That's right. But yeah, they basically had he's making he's chastising, I guess, the capitalists in this sense by saying that having naked women and girls work with men is like really fucked up. But he's like, hey, it works for their morals, aka lack of morals. And he says, especially by their ledgers, meaning it worked for them because it saved them so much money. And the only reason they, I guess, maybe stopped that practice was because of the sort of Factory Act, I think is what he's referencing here. Yeah. Hooray for all the child labor.
No escaping finding unique and disgusting ways to be awful.
Well, they've already run out of unique and disgusting ways, so now we're bringing back child labor because it was such a big hit.
Mm-hmm. Because little Timmy getting put into the orphan crushing machine is absolutely the best way to use little Timmy's time and childhood.
I don't know. I think nowadays it'd be more like the children yearn for the, I don't know, fry cook's grill or something. Like, I don't. It's like the often memed like, oh, what's a stereotypical job that requires no skill level? Oh, like a simple fry cook at McDonald's or something. It's
You also see a lot of cleaning positions and grocery store adjuncts.
yeah.
The ones where
the most recent uncovering of child labor, they were finding, kids in like
meat
food processing
plants.
food processing plants, things like that. And some state, I forget which one, recently relaxed its labor laws that used to prevent people, I think, under 16 or 18 from doing things like mining or construction or things like that, and they relaxed those laws to where you can do, I guess they can do them when they're like 14 or 15 now. So
I want
14.
to say
Yeah.
Arkansas, but I'm not sure.
It was
Yeah.
Michigan for that particular one.
Yeah,
And in
I couldn't
Alabama,
remember.
here they found them in a Hyundai facility overnight.
Yep.
I mean, it's like there's, I mean, I'm not going to say there's a difference, but I mean, there are cases where they found kids working jobs they shouldn't have been. Either they were too young, or they were jobs that were considered too dangerous for kids their age, or the states just went ahead and they're like, let's just relax those laws because we know people are doing it anyway.
Yeah, it's kind of the game of unless the financial punishment is significantly more than what they make off of the freaking labor
Right.
exploitation, they're going to do it. I am
It's not so much
personally,
that it's illegal, it's just legal for a price.
yeah. If the fine is less than what you earn from it, it's a tax, not a fine.
Yep.
Yeah, I also tend to think that, like, I'm also wondering how do these like negotiations happen between these capitalists and children. I mean, I'm inclined to think that the child in question is actually from like an incredibly poor family and like absolutely needs money to either support themselves or support the rest of their family, or both.
Here,
It's
Yeah,
going to
or
be both. It's going to be
Or-
also tacked onto iterations of H-1B visa abuse.
Right. But that's
It
why I
was-
wonder. It's like, because no way does this kid walk in and the capitalist is like, "How old are you?" And they answer honestly. It's probably more like, "Hey, are you 16?" Wink, wink.
here
Answering
in
in the
Alabama,
affirmative.
it was migrant worker children, and Marx talks about that too in this chapter with children that look 13, able to
Yeah.
pass for 13.
Oh yeah.
You also,
In
in
the
a
ads.
slightly... Yeah, I mean, for frick's sake, you run into the other favorite of capital exploitation, child soldiers, eventually. Because they apparently yearn for the trenches, too.
Well, we already know
And-
the kids these days yearn for the drones.
Hmm. Yeah, that way they can have rainbow drones that go and bomb all of those countries that aren't giving us everything that the US demands of them. Very healthy exchange.
That's right. Like, hey, listen here, son. Have you ever played the new Call of Duty game where you blow up Soleimani? The kid's like, yeah. Great, you're hired.
Oh my god.
Here's
I
the
was in the
Predator
room when
drone
someone
for
played
you.
that mission, and she was just as appalled as I was. Oh my god.
Yeah, I haven't played that one at all. I don't think I haven't seen it, but I did
I
play
haven't
the
played
one.
Call of Duty, period.
I did play the one a little bit from a few years ago where there's some mission that was recreating like the road of death or something like that is what it's called. It's something,
I think so, yeah.
yeah,
Highway of Death.
Highway, yeah, there you go. It was Highway of Death. Yeah, and they're like in the game they're like it's the Russians.
Mhm.
And even in real life it's 100% the Americans.
It's, I swear, Call of Duty is
But
basically
remember,
very
Call of Duty is
That's it.
apolitical.
No, I was going to say it's very quietly the CIA's own if I did it.
Kind
well,
of, yeah.
This Activision
Actually, that's
hired
like 100% fucking accurate. Holy shit.
Activision hires straight out of the U.S.
Fuck.
government into their director positions.
Yeah, there are quite a few corporate entities that are
Oh my god.
one-for-one overlap with former federal positions.
And yeah, it was the highway of death when Americans bombed a ton of Iraqi civilians retreating from Kuwait, right?
I don't remember
During
the
the-
specifics, but yeah.
It was the Gulf Wars, yeah.
Yeah.
I can't believe, like, it just still appalls me that they were like, yep, the Russians did this.
Yeah. It's also funny that like they're so, I don't know, uncreative that they're like, I don't know, what could be something really appalling for the bad guys in this game to do? Oh, I know. How
Like,
about that thing we
America
did? How about that thing we
Yeah,
did a
let's just
couple years
flip
ago?
through the CIA files.
Yeah, I'm like, who is writing this game? They're like, what's the most evil thing I can think of? Oh, I guess just look at the past shit the CIA and Army has done. They'll give
thing you
you
know, there's gonna
infinite
be
inspiration for bad guy villainous activity.
Next thing you know, they're gonna have a fucking Call of Duty game where it's the Cubans actually did like an Operation Northwoods. Like they
Maybe.
actually have it so like the Cubans do like an Operation Northwoods.
Honestly, you know what I would love to see just for the memes? They need to have a Call of Duty game where they actually have Havana Syndrome. That would be hilarious.
Is the airport scene based off of reality at all? Like any of it?
No, I don't think so.
I've never played COD, so I just hear random shit and I'm just like, oh, okay.
It was insensitive, but I don't think it was based off anything real.
That we know of.
Yeah, I don't think it was.
Yeah, that we
it
know
definitely
of.
was. Yeah,
Wait-
I don't
wait
think it
for
was
3
based on
years and
anything real.
Maybe a document comes out of the CIA or something. I don't fucking know.
Yeah, I don't think it was based on anything real, but they were definitely capitalizing off of like the, post 9/11 like airport anxiety,
Yeah.
right? Because that was, if you're too young to like remember, like the transition from like pre 9/11 to post 9/11 airport security was like pretty jarring.
It was really
yeah.
fast.
Yeah. I mean, I was young, and even then, it was, even as like a younger kid, it was still like noticeable. Like, oh shit, like everyone's super serious now.
I wonder if anyone's. Sorry, it just got me distracted. It just makes me wonder if there's anyone doing like studies of like generational trauma that 9/11 has caused.
I wouldn't be surprised. That sounds like something even like liberal social scientists could study, and
Get away with publishing it.
yeah, they could publish it with like, and still be considered, patriots, brother.
It was still so weird, like coming home and like turning on the news and seeing that, or in school.
All right. So section 3 here. Let's course correct a little bit here. So now we'll talk about the immediate effects of machine production on the workers. So it'll intro abstract thing here. As we've shown, the starting point of large-scale industry is the revolution in the instruments of labor, and this attains its most highly developed form in the organized system of machinery in the factory. Before we inquire how human material is incorporated in this objective organism, let us consider some general effects of the revolution on the worker himself. So, first part here, appropriation of supplementary labor power by capital, the employment of women and children. So like I said, he kind of already introduced this idea already, that the capitalists will eventually need to seek out new labor sources, and preferably cheaper ones, to put to work in order to keep growing. So one thing he's talking about here is muscle power, or sort of bodily strength, or whatever he calls it. So the idea is that like kind of there were certain types of work, old school manufacturing, I guess, that would be very restrictive for most women and children to do, because just strength limitations and like physical limitations. So one consequence then of machinery is basically reducing those requirements for just like raw bodily strength, because now you have some sort of motive power like electricity or steam power or what have you that is able to augment a lot of the work. And by work I'm talking about like the physics sense of like force times distance, right? Like how much force are you required to do. If you simplify a lot of that stuff so that things don't weigh as much or they just don't require as much force to operate, whatever, then you pretty much open up a lot of machinery to be run by, well, just about anybody who has basic level of coordination, which opens up the playing field for labor a lot more. All right, so this paragraph sort of explains this pretty well, I think, or at least this and its consequence. So he says the value of labor power was determined not only by the labor time necessary to maintain the individual adult worker, but also by his necessary to maintain his family. Machinery, by throwing every member of that family onto the labor market, spreads the value of the man's labor power over his whole family. It thus depreciates it. To purchase the labor power of a family of 4 workers may perhaps cost more than it formerly did to purchase the labor power of the head of the family, but in return, 4 days' labor takes the place of 1 day's, and the price falls in proportion to the excess of the surplus labor of 4 over the surplus labor of 1. In order that the family may live, 4 people must now provide not only labor for the capitalists, but also their surplus labor. And thus we see that machinery, while augmenting the human material that forms capital's most characteristic field of exploitation, at the same time raises the degree of that exploitation. Okay, so yeah, one consequence of throwing the entire family now into the labor force means so on one hand they're kind of all competing for each other or against each other in some ways. That may not be totally true because I think they probably still would have been able to like self-sort into different divisions of labor. But the point is, when you remember how surplus labor works, right? Or relative surplus labor, surplus value, is that by making all the things you need to support your family cheaper, by making mass production much easier, you also lower the value of labor. So now what he's saying is what happens is that you lower it so much, now you can and you also make the labor itself easier to do. Now you've introduced the ability to just straight up hire every member of the family that's older than like 10 or something like that. Men, women, children, the whole gang is in the factory now. And he's saying that like, yeah, even though paying 4 workers now instead of 1 is more expensive, or it sounds more expensive, because he's like, technically it is, but you're also getting quadruple the surplus labor out of it. So you are actually coming out on top at the end of the day. And now you don't pay obviously you're not paying each member of the family enough to support the whole family. You're, like he says, if there's 4 people in the family, for example, you're paying each of them a quarter of what it would take to support the whole family. So in other words, like they can basically only support themselves. So yeah, it's pretty fucked up. And nowadays, I feel like that's much more, I don't know, like widely accepted as like pretty normal. Where or it's getting worse, and I know we've talked about this before, but this is one of the pressures on working people that would incentivize them probably not to have children, because it's like, well, if I'm basically being paid enough just to support myself and not much more than that, then how can I be expected to raise a child who obviously does not have an income? Right? And so it's like, this is one of the issues, obviously, one of the big contradictions here. And this, I think this will culminate at the end of the chapter, but like the whole point is that with a lot of what capital does, it tends to undermine its own basis for existence. And one of those bases, of course, is the labor force that it continuously exploits. And if it continuously undermines the labor force by making them like basically, and this is later on in the chapter too, but like by making them stupider, less skilled, and by less skilled I mean like skilled in a well-rounded way. Like you might be very, very skilled at one specific thing, right? Because that's the division of labor happening. So you have the division of labor, but then once you are divided into your one role, okay, like, you know, this is what you do for a living. You just do that one thing for essentially your whole life. So yeah, you might become extremely skilled at one thing, but you're not like skilled in a lot of different things. Like you might be if you had time to actually, you know, do stuff in your free time. So yeah, that's another consequence there. Let's see. Yeah, so some more breaking down here. This is kind of a harrowing thought, right? Talking about how workers were selling just themselves into wage slavery, if you will, at some kind of an earlier stage of capitalist development. But now the capitalist buys children and young people, and so now the worker is not just selling his own labor power, which he says he disposes of as a free agent, formally speaking, right? It's like quote unquote free agent. But now he's also compelled to sell his wife and child into labor. So he's sort of analogizing this to a slave dealer, which is pretty messed up. But he's like, yeah, you know, the demands for children's labor are not that different for demands of slavery or specific slaves. So this is the one I think that you're talking about just a second ago, right? Where
yeah,
they want some young people, but they can't, or no younger than what can pass for 13 years old. So if you look too young, that would be a problem for the factory owner, because they're like, listen, we're gonna have inspectors at some point, and I need to just be like, yep, see, you can obviously tell all these children are 13 or older clearly. Although that is really funny that like the factory acts, which are like these supposedly progressive laws, still have fucking 13-year-olds working 6 hours a day. Like, oh damn, that's still pretty brutal by modern standards, at least.
At the bottom of that page, further where he talks about how after the factory acts were passed, at least statistically, the number of kids under 13 working in factories basically dropped to zero, but that's only because the certifying surgeons actually worked for the companies or the employers themselves and just signed off on like whatever. They're like, yeah, they're totally 13 years old. And so when the factory inspectors came along, they, produced all of the paperwork for the children working there. That's like, look, they're all 13 or older. Promise.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's the old doctors are, because I think sometimes he said the company doctors were literally on the company payroll, so
yeah.
To keep their job, they kind of had to give the green light, even if it was anything but green.
Yeah, it is very difficult to remove yourself from a situation where it is work or starve. Or work and starve, I guess.
Well, speaking of, tying into that at least, glad to see that they're bringing back factory towns as well.
Oh no,
Because
those never went away.
evidently we haven't fucking learned from the past.
I mean, why would we?
Yeah, no, the factory town is still very much around.
Yeah, I mean, there are several that just never shut down. I mean, there are also things like Disney's properties, which are very much the same thing, and I would say even more invasive than the original iterations.
Okay, so I highlighted this as well. So, because at the end of this is pretty some interesting language. So he says they allege, excuse me, that numbers of parents withdrew their children from the industries brought under the act in order to sell them, where freedom of labor still prevailed, i.e., where children under 13 years are compelled to work like adults, and for that reason can be sold at a higher price. But since capital is by its nature a leveler, since it insists upon equality in the conditions of exploitation of labor in every sphere of production as its own innate right, the limitation by law of children's labor in one branch of industry results in its limitation in others. Definitely a pretty interesting statement there. And I think Harvey mentions, if not in the lecture related to this one, and maybe other lectures, but I think he is definitely interested in this idea of capital as a leveling force, or like a leveler, something that's constantly normalizing everything around it. And I think in the manifesto, right, they say, that capital will spread across the earth and like shape everything into its own image, basically. So if not a level, it is kind of a leveler, right? It's smoothing out all of the natural roughness in the world. But yeah, definitely pretty interesting that, I guess, I don't know. This one was a little hard to wrestle with because I was like, man, wouldn't it make sense? I guess capital basically just decided that, like, listen, these laws, let's just play by the rules with these laws, and kind of roll with it. And I think part of the idea, and I think later on, Marx will talk about regulations more. But one of the things with regulations is that typically the bigger capitals can handle it and be all right and still be, fairly profitable. Whereas these smaller capitals, the ones that are maybe have thinner margins, if they're suddenly hit with a regulation like, hey, mom and pop pottery shack who only employs 12-year-olds and under, that's illegal now. You gotta fire all them kids and hire older kids or something. And if that becomes too difficult, then the mom and pop shop goes down. But the big old honkin', megacorp down the street who wanted to box them out of the market anyways, they're like, oh, we have to fire like our 10, 12-year-olds and get 10, 13-year-olds instead. No problem. We can afford to do that. No issues. So yeah, I think regulation actually, in a funny way, kind of enhances the concentration of capital. And that's, at least that's my interpretation of this leveling. This sort of, because it is an accumulator, it's constantly like agglomerating more and more capital into it. It's like it's making everything more monotonous, and this is one of the side effects of monopolization. But yeah, it's definitely pretty interesting to think about. And it's funny too, because I think, and some of y'all might also be familiar with this, but if you hear the liberals in the walls talk about how, like, oh, if only we had better regulations, right? If only we had stricter regulations, more regulations, blah blah blah, then it would actually it would actually help the mom and pop shop or whatever, or the small businesses of the world, when nothing could be further from the truth. And ironically, I think when you hear like the petty bourgeois basically bicker and moan about regulations, they're not totally wrong, right? They're not totally wrong that like regulations might snuff out little smaller businesses. They're kind of right. But who won't get snuffed out? The gigantic Uber multinational corporations. They're just fine. They can handle it. And by the way, they probably also, at this point in history, they probably are paying the people writing that legislation in such a way that it won't actually hurt the bottom line. It'll only fuck over smaller competitors. So yeah, that's definitely a thing. Okay, we've got more stats about how many children die under capitalism, so that's fun. What else? Okay. Oh yeah. Let's see. 3. Okay, so Marx being a homie, citing his friend's angles. Gotta get that citation count up. But more importantly here, he also, this is where he starts addressing some of the intellectual degeneration that I sort of mentioned earlier. So he says that it's artificially produced by transforming immature human beings into mere machines for the production of surplus value. And he clarifies here, right, that there's a distinction between this and a natural state of ignorance in which the mind lies fallow without losing its capacity for development, its natural fertility. Finally compelled even the English Parliament to make elementary education a legal requirement before children under 14 years can be consumed productively by being employed in those industries which are subject to the Factory Acts. Again, more haunting language from Marx. These children under 14 years old being consumed productively. It's like pretty fucking messed up.
Well, from a historic standpoint, it makes sense. You're dealing with the industrialization of the UK at the time, and basically it mulching children.
Yep. But yeah, he's also kind of laying out this idea, right, that like in a funny way, it's kind of like some of the footnotes, right, where sometimes the footnote is almost more important than what he's saying. But in this case, it's almost like the parentheses are almost what's more important here. But he's saying that like part of the intellectual degeneration is due to the fact that you are not. It's okay to be ignorant about something as long as you're interested in learning, right? That's sort of this idea that like losing, the real degeneration is losing your capacity for developing, or basically like not even knowing how to learn, or not being interested in learning potentially. And so your mind is so focused on what am I trying to say? You're such a single-tracked mind. So if you're only focused on your job only, and that's it, if that's the only type of education you ever get, you're not really educated. You're and especially if you don't even bother learning anything past that. So, and I think we definitely see this in the modern era as well, where
absolutely.
Yeah, where like it seems like education systems are more and more designed in ways of like reinforcing rote memorization pretty much, instead of working things out for yourself, doing your own research, and like actual research, not like I read it on Facebook. That means it's real. Yeah, just basic. I call it basic critical thinking, but like the key word there is critical. Critical means to give, to intake information and then criticize it, like critique it in your mind. Does this sound right? Does it pass the sniff check? And if it smells funny, maybe I should look for another source and start to verify these things. And then you kind of cross-examine, or just honestly just think about it for yourself for 5 seconds and see if you can come up with an answer that's satisfying. None of this is well taught in schools, right? I mean, yeah, you might have a teacher that goes the extra mile to teach that, and if that's the case, then I would say you're lucky. But unfortunately, I think, especially at least in the States, where I can comment on that a little more strongly, that because public education is being pretty systematically defunded, you have teachers having bigger and bigger classrooms, right? More and more kids to teach, and that means it's getting more and more impossible to actually make sure each student you're teaching is actually learning the material and actually learning how to think critically or just think about problems. It's mostly you have to do memorization because it scales easily.
Yeah. There was a passage on 524 that really made me think about sort of the sad state that the American education system has kind of degenerated into in the last, I don't know, 20 to 30 years definitely, but probably longer than that, where he says, it is not only the miserable places above referred to that the children obtain certificates of school attendance without having received instruction of any value, for in many schools where there is a competent teacher, his efforts are of little avail from the distracting crowd of children of all ages, from infants of 3 years old and upwards, his livelihood miserable at the best, depending on the pence received from the greatest number of children whom it is possible to cram into the space. To this is to be added scanty school furniture, deficiency of books, and other materials for teaching, and the depressing effect upon the poor children themselves of a close, noisome atmosphere. So, and I'm just like, you think about how they talk about like class sizes getting bigger, and how some schools, if they have textbooks at all, those textbooks may be woefully out of date, falling apart, missing pages. They might not have enough desks for all the kids, so they might be like sitting on the floor.
Teachers having to use their own salary for resources.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And
Textbooks
then
actively sabotaged by the government themselves.
right. And so what I feel like you can kind of take away from what Marx is saying here and apply to
Wouldn't it be fair to say
the capitalist class. Go ahead.
No, you finished your thought first.
Okay, that the capitalist class very strongly benefits from a kneecapped education system, one that basically, does this kind of thing where, okay, it ticks the, the legal boxes, and it just turns out a good compliant worker who maybe knows how to do just the things you need them to do and not much more than that. And they're curious about the world around them. They're not going to necessarily know that they should be asking for more money or that their conditions should be better. And so the more that you suppress that sort of critical thought that Grade A was talking about, and that ability to have that, the less likely you are to have workers that demand anything more than the whatever meagerness that they're given.
It does feed into a kind of horrific sort of self-defeating nihilism where it becomes impossible to imagine anything better because you've been kicked down, and the ability to process anything through a critical lens is seen as alien and wrong.
Or at least too much effort.
That is also true.
Yep, and that's even like the basic system of like test giving and having standardized tests has like a lot of issues with it, right? Because yeah, I get that on one hand you do want to make sure, or at least try to make sure, that students have some basic understanding of the material. Yeah, it encourages much more of a like, oh, memorize this series of instructions and execute them when I tell you to.
It's absolutely a compliance model.
Right.
I was kind of thinking about that while going through this section, because a lot of people accuse or say that school these days is set up just to get us ready for work, and like that's literally what was happening here.
I don't think it's ever really changed much.
Yeah.
I think it does start to fall off a bit if you do stay in like higher education, college courses and university and stuff like that. It's a little better. But at least I can tell you, like, from a grad school perspective, even if I'm not experiencing that stuff in the classroom, you bet your ass that I'm getting spammed with emails like all the time saying like, oh, go to these career fairs, go to this like seminar on how to make the best resume possible, or like here's how to sell yourself into slavery the most effective way possible. And it's like, dude, like, fuck off. I don't care. Like, please stop. I don't. So yeah, they're just like hammering you with all this stuff, because even if they want you to learn a little more in-depth technical stuff and more theoretical application where you do start having to like actually solve difficult problems by yourself, which I will say, well, it is very difficult, it's much more fun at the same time. But they never let you forget why you're here, right? They never let you forget that you are here to serve capital, and you should be constantly becoming the best technician possible. And at least I can, in my industry specific, it'd be like, the other implied is you should serve the military industrial complex if possible, because that is the highest thing you can achieve in life. Like, it's, the propaganda is pretty relentless.
Yeah, and even if you are given that little push to actually do critical thinking and critique, it definitely comes with the, an absolute upper level of what is acceptable. Push too far and somebody is a what?
Mommy.
Just a little bit.
That's right.
Okay, you know,
If
embrace
I
it.
ever
It feels
do,
good.
I was gonna say, if I ever do end up interviewing to be a professor somewhere, I'll just be like, first thing I'll be like, all right, listen, cards on the table. Big fan of Marx. So, all I can hope for is that whoever's on that hiring committee is like, oh, sweet, us too.
So I remember when I got hired as a student assistant when I was an undergrad, I went to a state school, and I don't know if this is still the case if you get hired by like any state agency where I live anymore, but you used to actually have to like part of like your employment contract with the state included signing an oath that you were not, never have been a member of the Communist Party.
Ooh.
Yeah, this was early 2000s. I mean, not super long ago, not like, Red Scare days or anything like that. And I don't know if that's still in state employment contracts or not, but it was apparently just boilerplate.
Nice.
I
guess.
And I'm like,
I'll have to...
and at the time, I could honestly say no. Now, not so much.
I was gonna say maybe I'll wait to join a big time party until after I have tenure.
Yeah.
I don't remember where I heard it, but I think that's still on immigration forms. I heard that recently.
Oh yeah, I think I've heard that too. I don't know if that's like, that might depend on is it?
I think they require you, like, if you ever had, like, especially if you're coming from like a former Eastern Bloc state, you would, I would assume that you'd have to like denounce it publicly or something like that. I mean, I have no idea, but like there would have to be some kind of mechanism.
Or just locked.
I mean, yeah, there is that.
Like, what? I thought this was the land of the free, home of the brave.
Let's make it so.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or like land of the cucked, home of the fucking cowards.
Land of the depraved.
Yeah.
Ain't nothing wrong with being depraved, man.
I mean,
sometimes it's.
I was gonna say, like, it's hard
if
to.
your depravity involves bombing children.
Okay, I mean, not that kind of depravity. I was talking about the fun kind of depravity.
No, there ain't nothing wrong with that kind. But if your pastime involves bombing children, then there's a certain hole in the ground that has your name on it.
Dante wrote some biblical fan fiction about that.
Some of the hardest hitting fanfic of all time. It was so popular, it got canonized pretty much.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay, yeah. Next, we got...
This is why these are 2 hours long.
Well, it's also like 60 pages. That means... Yeah, if we spent 2 minutes per page, it would still take 2 hours.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's... that's about the pace. Okay. So part B here, section 3. Prolongation of the working day. So to set up the problem here, he says if machinery is the most powerful means of raising the productivity of labor, of shortening its working time needed to produce a commodity, It is also, as a repository of capital, the most powerful means of lengthening the working day beyond all natural limits in those industries first directly seized on by it. It creates, on the one hand, new conditions which permit capital to give free rein to this tendency, and on the other, new incentives which whet its insatiable appetite for the labor of others. So again, we've got this apparent contradiction, right, of this massive increase in productivity that machinery enables, and yet we're all still working as hard and as long as ever. And I mean, I guess since Marx's time, it has gotten a little bit better, but that is 100% thanks to, working class militancy, basically. So the capitalists had to back the fuck off. But hey, they're pushing back, right? They're like, I mean, I think nowadays, like, people are working like fairly long hours still, and I know that overtime is more of a common practice than it probably was in Marx's time. I don't even know if Marx, I think he talks about overtime a little bit, but I don't think it was very common. It's like, if you're working 16 hours a day, like, what kind of overtime do you even have available to you if you plan on sleeping? But even overtime is like, can be very exploitative, because, like, okay, yes, you're getting paid, I don't know, 50% more, double, whatever. But you are, other than that, like, you're just offering, like, basically all of your labor straight to the capitalist. And even if you're working overtime, they're still not paying you, how much you're actually producing for it. They're just giving you a little bit of a better share, going the extra mile. Okay, so productivity of machinery is, as we saw, inversely proportional to the value transferred to the product. So again, recall, right? So if you're hypothetical, if your machine is really shitty, let's say that it will help you make one product, but then it will, like, immediately break down. Well, that just means that it's very unproductive, and it transfers all of its value in one fell swoop. Whereas if it's like infinitely productive, if you have a perfect machine, let's say it's like it's a perpetual motion machine or something, then it would just, that's actually, I mean, Marx essentially draws an analogy, I think, somewhere in here. I don't remember where. Might have been the last section. Actually, maybe it's up here. Yeah, I think this is roughly it. Oh, no. That's talking about something else. That's talking about how machines view humans as this inconvenient obstacle to being efficient. No, I was thinking of some other. He made some other point at some point else, which is basically saying, if you have a perfectly efficient machine that's like 100%, or like perfectly productive, such that it never ever breaks down, that is pretty much what we just call a force of nature, right? Like the laws of physics, the laws of like gravity. Okay, gravity is like this force that we never have to pay for. It takes us no human labor to actually have gravity. Gravity just is a fact of being on planet Earth. So and the value that gravity can do, because gravity can do work on objects by making them fall, or also that's why objects are as heavy as they are to us, is due to the gravitational acceleration on them. But we don't have to pay for that property, right? It's just a force. So like a machine, it behaves sort of like a machine in that it's like a naturally occurring force, except it doesn't cost anything to upkeep. So the idea with machinery is that you want it to be pretty much as close to a natural force as you can get it. In other words, it transfers closer and closer to zero value to the products. It's getting, and in that way, it's getting more and more productive. Okay. Longer, yeah, so just to finish this paragraph. The longer the period during which it functions, the greater is the mass of the products over which the value transmitted by the machine is spread, and the smaller is the portion of the value added to each single commodity. And the active lifetime of the machine, however, is clearly dependent on the length of the working day, or the duration of the daily labor process multiplied by the number of days for which its process carried on. Yeah, so with that first diatribe said, the second diatribe that he's getting into now is that, well, if you A, want your machines very, very productive, and B, you want them to be, so I kind of skipped over the parts where Marx, I think, talks about how machines will break down, unless it's coming up. Maybe I haven't skipped it yet. Whatever. Maybe we haven't gotten there yet. But it's the point he says where machines are either breaking down because they're being used, or they're breaking down because they're not being used. Either, and obviously, as a capitalist, you've invested money in this thing, and you want to get that value out of it, transfer it to the products. Therefore, you're going to want to make sure it loses value while being used, not while it's not being used. So that incentivizes capitalists to make sure their machines are being used all day, every day. And I can definitely tell y'all, as someone who's been around industrial engineers, like, yeah, the thing that they get drilled in their brain is the one thing that they're concerned about is downtime, and specifically minimizing downtime. If you have to shut down your manufacturing setup, system, factory, whatever, that is a huge waste of money, because you are paying not only for labor, you're also paying for like labor that's not really doing much. Because nowadays, I think a lot of people work salaries. So yeah, basically, if you like, imagine, I'll even use an example I'm slightly familiar with. Imagine you're working in like a dairy processing plant, like you're pasteurizing milk on like an industrial scale. I know that in that industry, they have to shut down their plants between every 24 hours and 48 hours for a thorough decontamination of the entire factory floor, because the temperatures at which you pasteurize milk are also fantastic for bacterial growth. Ironically enough, or like the ambient temperature is good for bacterial growth. Obviously, the temperature of the milk is intended to get rid of that, but it makes the room, or like the area, very warm and rather moist, because you also are dealing with liquids that also evaporate. So you have basically a warm, damp environment, which is prime time, growing for all kinds of nasty bacteria and stuff. So yeah, they've got to shut things down every day, or maybe every other day or something, to give a thorough cleaning. And that is part of the reason why the dairy industry has such thin margins, and why it is almost 100% supported by subsidies at this point. And also why I would why I would strongly recommend probably not drinking milk. It's pretty fucked up. And not only because of the I mean, listen, I'm not a vegan or anything, but I think when it comes to dairy, the vegans have it correct in the sense that dairy production is insanely messed up. And it also is wildly inefficient. And it should on paper not be profitable. The only reason those companies still exist is because the government ensures that they do. So yeah, dairy industry bad. Surprising, I know. But point is that even though they are basically legally required to shut down every once in a while to clean everything, that is like the last thing they would like to do, because that means downtime. That means they have equipment that's just sitting there getting cleaned instead of, you know, processing more milk, whatever, cheese, etc. So yeah, definitely a tricky industry, but I think the same general concept can be extended to other industries, right? Even if you only clean your equipment like once a month or once a year or something, you know, you want to make sure that cleaning is fast and furious, because that, you know, while you're cleaning your equipment to make sure it stays operational, you're not using it, and that means it's not transferring value, and that is what these guys like to avoid.
I mean, this is like the same thing that happened with Norfolk Southern, or continues to happen. Just pushing the inspections faster and faster from 3 minutes per car to less than 1.
Yeah, I think safety is like a big category. You can probably lump a bunch of stuff under, of like downtime related activities, like, you know, yeah, it could be safety inspections, like I was talking about, sanitation, and like scheduled cleaning, inventory management, like all of this stuff that could be considered safety related. And there's other downtime stuff that's not safety. I mean, ironically, like fucking it's funny, right? Because everyone, I think in a lot of like higher pay brackets, you'll find people complaining about meetings a lot, and yet in like typically manufacturing jobs, that there's like no meetings, pretty much never, because they don't got time for that shit. If you're coming into work, it's because you're on the floor making stuff happen. Those folks typically don't waste their time in meetings, whereas the managerial classes have nothing better to do than have meetings with each other constantly. All right, let's keep here. Oh, okay, yeah. This is the one I was talking about. So close to it. So just to hear it in Marx's own words, the physical deterioration of the machine is 2 kinds. One arises from use. This coin's wear by circulating, and the other is from lack of use, such as a sword rusts when it's left in its scabbard. The second kind is consumption by the elements. Deterioration of the first kind is more or less directly proportional, and that of the second kind, to a certain extent, inversely proportional to the use of the machine. So that's the one I was thinking of. But yeah, that's for Marx, is basically just saying, well, clearly if you're a capitalist, buying a machine and then like just putting it in a warehouse, letting it rot and rust, is a pretty spectacular waste of money. But by the way, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It definitely does happen. But you'd rather that not happen. You'd rather put that machine to use pretty much immediately, and then have it continuously used until it is broken down or replaced. And he introduces this idea of this deterioration due to wear and tear or use, moral depreciation. Now, kind of like David Harvey mentions, I have no fucking clue why he chose the word moral in this context. Seems very odd choice of language, but whatever. The machines morally decay, and part of the reason is not just because they're I think, yeah, okay, I'll just read this because it explains it. It loses exchange value either because machines of the same sort are being produced more cheaply than it was, or because better machines are entering into competition with it. In both cases, however, young and full of life the machines may be, its value is no longer determined by the necessary labor time actually objectified in it, but by the labor time necessary to produce either it or the better machine. It is therefore devalued to a greater or lesser extent. And the shorter the period taken to reproduce its total value, the less the danger of the moral depreciation. And therefore, the longer the working day, the shorter that period is. So yeah, this is interesting, right? Because the machine is losing value because it's being used on the one hand. But on the other hand, because of just technological development, by and large, other people are making improvements to those machines. They're making new versions of the machines, or maybe they're just making them more cheaply, etc. So that basically means that as soon as you make a capital investment in some sort of machinery, that investment is getting worse by the second in capitalism, because you are basically on the clock now, literally speaking, almost, that you need to use that machine to justify purchasing it. That's kind of one way to think of it. And I think this is like one of the kind of rules of thumb in industry that I've heard of before. And it could be applied to a lot of things, but it's sort of this joke of, the best time to buy a new equipment is like 6 months from now, right? It's this idea of like, in the production cycle, like if you're looking at a product that you're like, oh man, this machine would be great, it'd help out my production so much. Well, if you just wait till kind of the next business cycle, they might have a new version that is even better, or that old version will go on sale because they have to push their inventory and make room for the new stuff. So yeah, that's if anyone's sort of, has anyone ever like built their own computer in here? Same shit.
Yeah.
Same shit with computer parts, right? I mean, even if we're not capitalists, we can at least experience what this is like when it's like, oh man, this part looks great. Exactly what I'm looking for. And then you have that immediate dilemma of like, oh man, but there might be another part next year that's
significantly better.
Either significantly better, or the part that I want will be significantly cheaper because there's a part that's significantly better.
Yeah, I mean, if you take a look at the freaking Ryzen chipset compared to Intel at the time they were launched, it's very much in that vein of, hey, remember when these two used to compete? Yeah, about that. One of them is just gonna shit the bed right now, so here's this instead. Even though they are both majority shareholders in each other.
Of course.
Like, unless you have just money to light on fire, never buy top of the line, because the second you take it out of the box, it's obsolete.
Yeah, I mean, like that was like fresh in my mind because I'm in the process of buying parts for a new computer. My computer right now is like going on 7 years old at this point, and it's starting to show. So I'm definitely scrapping together parts, but yeah, no, this part definitely reminded me of that. Like, oh man, This is
Yeah, I
frustrating.
can see that.
It's more obvious in especially right now in our modern context. Like it's more obvious in the computer parts industry because the advancement is so rapid. It may not be as obvious or as rapid in more well-established industries where you've had kind of the same general equipment for up to a century at this point. And you're just you might be literally substituting like individual parts. And you're just piecemealing, like, oh, this valve needs to be replaced. Okay, well, don't replace the whole system, just replace the valve, right? Or, etc. Like do like the minimum amount of maintenance that you can in order to make the fucking thing work. And then, keep going. Which is, by the way, very similar theme to the safety inspection dilemma or contradiction, where capital would like to not have to replace its like entire machine base like overnight, right? Because that costs a lot of money and there's always risk involved in doing that. So generally speaking, if they can just like duct tape and fucking bubblegum their way to making their machines last as long as possible, in some contexts that will also do the trick and ultimately end up saving a lot more money. But yeah, that stuff can be hard to do the math on, I suppose, as capitalists, which is why, I mean, every once in a while if you look for them, you can find it, right? You'll find a story where someone thinks they have like this amazing product they want to make. They think they have a super gung-ho market for it, that people are clamoring to buy this thing, and they invest all this money in brand spanking new machines. They produce that shit like crazy, and sure enough, there's a big group of sales like right at the beginning to all the diehards, and then all the sales dry up, and it's like, oops, we exhausted our market like immediately, and now we're deeply in the red, and now we're underwater, and a bigger company can swoop in and buy all that shit for dirt cheap. Hooray for monopolies.
That's the plan with a lot of startups nowadays, especially tech ones.
True. It's easier for tech companies, especially if they're like just software development based, because the capital investment is usually pretty fucking low.
Yep.
Yeah, they're mostly in the business of selling intellectual property instead of tangible property. Okay. Oh, this quote also, by the way, I think summarizes it nicely too. That this dude, when a laborer lays down his spade, he renders useless for that period a capital worth of 18 pence. But when one of our people leaves the mill, he renders useless a capital that has cost $100,000 pounds. Just imagine that. Making useless, if only for a single moment, a piece of capital that has cost 100 grand. It is in truth monstrous that a single one of our people should ever leave the factory. So yeah, or Marx roasting capitalists because of their depravity, as it were. Okay. This paragraph's also pretty solid here. Okay, so machinery produces relative surplus value, not only by directly reducing the value of the labor power and indirectly cheapening it by cheapening the commodities that enter into its reproduction. This is the one we already know about. But also, when it is first introduced sporadically into an industry, by converting the labor employed by the owner of that machinery into a labor of a higher degree, by raising the social value of the article produced above its individual value, and thus enabling the capitalist to replace the value of a day's labor power by a smaller portion of the value of a day's product. During this transitional period, while the use of machinery remains a sort of monopoly, profits are exceptional. The capitalist endeavors to exploit thoroughly the sunny time of this his first love by prolonging the working day as far as possible. The magnitude of profit gives him an insatiable hunger for yet more profit. So, as a callback, chapter 12, you recall this graph that I made. Marx is demonstrating the exact same concept here, right? Or the exact same phenomenon. That basically, when you, let's see, what does he call it? So I should say it's the exact same, but flipped on its head. So I mean, just imagine a value down here like jumping, right? So if you raise the no, I think is it the same thing? You're indirectly cheapening it by cheapening commodities. No, that's for labor, right? Okay. Raising the social value of the article produced above individual, thus enabling the capital structure. Yeah, I think it is this chart, right? Because you're basically, if the black dotted line is the social average, that's what prices are based off of, roughly. Then if you undercut that by being extra productive, then you're going to have a period here where this is, I think, what he calls like, sunny time of crazy profits is when you undercut your competition with crazy technology. At least I think that's what it means. And so you're kind of constantly chasing this high that exists in this region here. Actually. There we go. There we go. There we go. Perfect figure. I think, if I'm interpreting this correctly, this period of like basically competitive advantage over your competitors is, I think, what he means by saying you are kind of like a monopoly for a short period because you are undercutting the social average with your new technology. I think. If anyone else is reading that differently, let me know. I think that's kind of the idea here. That this new technology can give you windfall profits, not permanently, but at least for a short amount of time. And at that point, it's sort of like, right, it's like that metaphor of chasing the dragon. You're just like, oh my gosh, we did so amazing in this period of time where we had competitive advantage. We should do that again. And, keep chasing the insatiable hunger. Okay. Let's see here. Ah, yes. So going forward slightly here. So right here, let's start this little paragraph. More like big paragraph, but he says, now, however, however much the use of machinery may increase surplus labor at the expense of necessary labor by raising the productive power of labor, it is clear that it attains this result only by diminishing the number of workers employed by a given amount of capital. It converts a portion of capital which was previously variable, i.e. had been turned into living labor, into machinery, which is constant capital, which does not produce surplus value. It is impossible, for instance, to squeeze as much surplus value out of two as out of 24 workers. If each of these 24 men only gives 1 hour of surplus labor in 12, the 24 men together give 24 hours of surplus labor, while 24 hours is the total labor of the 2 men. Hence, there is an imminent contradiction in the application of machinery to the production of surplus value, since of the 2 factors of the surplus value created by a given amount of capital, one, the rate of surplus value, cannot be increased except by diminishing the other, the number of workers. This contradiction comes to light as soon as machineries come into general use in a given industry, for then the value of the machine-producing commodity regulates the social value of all commodities of the same kind. And it is this contradiction which, in turn, drives the capitalist, without his being aware of the fact, to the most ruthless and excessive prolongation of the working day, in order that he may secure compensation for the decrease in the relative number of workers, exploited by increasing not only relative but also absolute surplus labor. Okay, it's a little bit of a mouthful, but the point is to say, if we kind of reflect back on, like, okay, the whole mission here from the capitalist perspective is the surplus labor. And it would seem pretty obvious to us that that would hopefully imply hiring as many people as possible. But ironically, that is not what capitalists prefer to do, because hiring a bunch of people basically just increases your capital costs, which you're trying to also minimize. However, if you just try and basically break or keep, trying to increase surplus value by machinery over and over again, those machines are replacing workers. That's kind of the whole point. And by replacing workers, you're also replacing surplus value in exchange for basically value transfer, right? You're transferring value from the machine into the new commodity, but you're not actually adding any surplus. The surplus gets added by the workers that you're employing and subsequently underpaying. So this is one of the contradictions, right? Is that when you increase your constant capital compared to your variable, you tend to lower your rate of profit. And that's pretty much exactly what automation and mechanization of industry tends to do. So this is, I think, partially the basis of one of Marx's infamous theses of the tendency for the rate of profit to decline. And in this case, specifically, he's pointing out how machinery can be one of the culprits behind that contradiction. And I think you can kind of do the thought experiment for this as well, right? Where if you have I guess I'll just go back to the idea of the perpetual motion machine. But if you have a product, let's say, that is able to be produced with literally no labor, like none whatsoever, it can be infinitely duplicated, basically. Marx's argument says that thing that can be infinitely duplicated should logically have no cost or like no value. It makes sense because, I mean, it should. Because if you can just infinitely duplicate the damn thing, you know, how can you hold it over people's heads? They can just get a copy of it themselves and be like, okay, I have the product now. I didn't inconvenience literally any living person in order to get this. It's also kind of why, for example, Marx sadly takes air, for example, to be this sort of not uncommodifiable resource. Now, I think we all know that is not necessarily true because marketing exists, but also air pollution exists. So,
and Spaceballs joke.
Yeah, so eventually, yes, they will actually try to sell air, and they've certainly. Is another funny thing. I don't know if Marx ever anticipated, but like they absolutely sell water. That's a big one. That's actually a pretty big industry.
Nestle.
Yeah. Oh yeah. But yeah, no, it's and I think I don't remember where I remember hearing this, but it was like that thought experiment of, around Marx's labor theory of value and all that. It does bring up the question of like, okay, is there something in the universe that might qualify, even if like obviously we can't have an actual perpetual energy or perpetual motion machine that can basically create energy or mass out of nothing. But, can we think of something that is easily duplicable that costs a very, very, very low amount of energy, a very, very low amount of labor? And the simple answer would be data. Data, like raw info, ones and zeros, is pretty much the cheapest possible thing that you could produce. Which is ironic because it's also like the current peak of our technological advancement is sort of like super advanced computer systems, which is all just ones and zeros at the end of the day. So yeah, it's pretty interesting to think about it in that sense that like software basically is essentially infinitely duplicable. Now, obviously, even software has a material basis, right? You need hard drives or cloud storage. You need something physical to store it on. Eventually you need a server, right? You need something, or a drive. You need something to store it on. So even that argument breaks down a little bit when you poke a hole in it, but it's pretty close. Data and software and all that is pretty close to commodities which are ridiculously easy to duplicate. Once they've been made, essentially all the you're good. You can pretty much just hit copy and paste over and over and over again, as long as there's no reason we can't just take the install package for, let's say, Adobe Photoshop and send it to everybody on the planet who has a computer and let them install it.
I already do that.
Yeah, it's an argument
I'm discussing a completely hypothetical, file sharing system, wink, wink, that totally does not exist and is totally illegal. That's very bad, you guys.
Yes, you should not do that.
Yeah, I mean, sharing data and files with each other, because it's extremely easy and doesn't inconvenience basically anybody.
Speaking of that watermark.
Yeah, no.
That reminds me of what my friends and I would joke about in college, when somebody would say that they got something, that something was free. It would be like, okay, so free as in speech, free as in beer, or free as in BitTorrent.
Mm. Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, free is rather contextual these days. I guess you could say it's always been. That's why I'll jokingly be like, anytime I'm like talking to someone, like, oh, I'll say like, oh, did you like for example, right, The Last of Us? I'll be like, oh, did you watch The Last of Us? And they'll be like, oh no, I don't, like, nah, I didn't want to get like HBO Max or whatever. I'm like, yeah, me neither. And they're just like, wait, what? I don't get it. It's like, come on, y'all.
Like, come on, bro, read between the lines.
Yeah. All right. So that's a good paragraph there. Okay. So, yeah, I think we can mostly get to section C here. Intensification of labor. This is another section I thought was pretty straightforward, which, you know, kind of follows from the last one. So we basically have this incentive to extend the working day as long as possible, which is just another way of saying to get as much labor done as possible in 24 hours. And obviously, we already know from previous chapters that there's a clear limit to how long you can extend the working day. Not only are you restrained by just the human bodies of your workers and the fact that they need to sleep every once in a while, but there's also the matter of class struggle, right? If you push them to work too long for too grueling a situation, they're gonna fucking get pissed and shut down your operation, and that's no good. So extending the working day, yes, it's one of the incentives that capital is looking for, but it is of limited use. You can only do it so much. There are hard limits on that. But Marx is getting into this section saying, well, once you kind of hit the wall, you run up against the barriers of how long you can push the working day. You can start to push the intensity of labor. So this is basically a question of how much labor are you getting for your labor power buck, so to speak. Because labor power, remember, is just the ability to do work for labor. It has nothing to do with how much labor you actually do in a given amount of time. And therefore, like, different people have different labor powers. So, and power here, by the way, is just like a STEM Lord note. Recall that power is work per unit time. Work meaning energy, basically. But they call it work for a reason. So basically, work per unit time means if you have the same amount of time, meaning how long your working day is, if that part of it is fixed, we can still increase the total labor power by just increasing the amount of work that you do. And that is basically what Marx calls the intensification of labor. So there you go. That's pretty much what this section is about. So
David Harvey mentioned this, and I thought of it as well while I was reading this. And if you've ever seen the Charlie Chaplin film Modern Times, where he's working in the factory and and things just kind of almost comedically speed up such that he can't keep up with it.
yeah, no, I have not actually seen that. Probably should at some point.
It's been a few years, but it is actually, it's a good movie. It holds up. There's some very salient commentary on there.
I mean, Chaplin was a socialist, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
He actually left the United States for quite a long time because he was essentially exiled.
Yep.
Orwell certainly seemed to think he was.
Right, I was going to say, I think he was on Orwell's shit list. Okay, so this next page says this compression of a greater mass of labor into a given period now counts for what it really is, namely increase in the quantity of labor. In addition to the measure of its extensive magnitude, labor time now requires a measure of its intensity or degree of density. So he's also using the concept of density here, which kind of works, right? Because density is how much mass is in a certain volume. So now we're just talking about how much work is in a certain time period. And like I just described, we actually do have a term for that in science. It's called power. So labor power actually is really the most accurate description of it, really. Yeah, and the analogy I always think of when thinking of power that I learned in physics class, right, is that if you have two people and they're walking up a hill from the bottom to the top, let's just say they weigh about the same. You can even say they're twins, like they're the same body or whatever. If one of them walks up the hill nice and slow, they take about a minute to get to the top. But the other one, sprints up the hill and they get there in like 6 seconds. Then that means the second guy who was running did 10 times, or his power exerted was 10 times higher because he did it in 1/10 of the time. And that's pretty much what Marx is describing in this chapter, right? It's gives an explanation here, right here, with using his obnoxiously complicated fractions instead of I don't know, round numbers. Would it kill you to do round numbers, Marx? Come on. But yeah, the idea is like, if you have a 10-hour workday and then and you get so much done, and some other guy has a 12-hour workday and you get the same amount done, then basically he's saying, a given product within the 10-hour period would have 1.2 times as much value as the ones. Or sorry, I did that backwards. The 10-hour one has a unit value of 1, and the 12-hour guy has a unit value of 1.2. That's what I meant to say. Yeah, so that's pretty much all we're saying. It's pretty basic math at the end of the day. I don't know if there was a ton else in this section that I immediately gravitated towards. It's just a shit ton of quotes. Okay. Next note is 2. Speed running now. Okay, let's see here. Capital's tendency, as soon as prolongation of the hours of labor is once for all forbidden, is to compensate for this by systematically raising the intensity of labor, converting every improvement in machinery into a more perfect means for soaking up labor power. There cannot be the slightest doubt that this process must soon lead once again to a critical point, at which a further reduction in the hours of labor will be inevitable. On the other hand, the rapid advance of the English industry between 1848 and the present time, and during the period of the 10-hour working day, surpasses the advance made by 1833 and 47 during the working period of 12-hour day, by far more than the latter surpasses the advance made during the half-century after its first introduction of the factory system during the period of the unrestricted work. So I think the point there, right, and the tables that follow are basically the evidence for that, is even when people are working these shorter 10-hour working days, they were actually more productive than the 12-hour working days, and even more productive than that when they had unrestricted working days, which would have been more like 16-hour working days. So again, it's sort of this irony that even if we're working less, we're actually machinery is allowing us to be even more productive over time. And one of our favorite graphs to reference here, let's see, is my tab changing? I take it.
Yeah, that one.
Our classic, our favorite graph here to cringe at is the old productivity versus hourly compensation curves. So yeah, I mean, as productivity is linearly increasing over time, again, this could just be due all kinds of things like more skilled labor, right? Labor's becoming more educated and just more savvy. There's also obviously improving technology throughout this whole thing, and yet once the labor unions get the axe, the lines begin to diverge quite a bit. And this first section I think is also important to talk about, right? Because the idea here is that labor unions had negotiated with their bosses in such a way that they said, hey, if we have increases in productivity that end up making more revenue, we want a fucking slice of that revenue, or like a proportional slice of that revenue. And this was like a part of a lot of union negotiating, in this period and before. And so really what the split honestly like demonstrates is sort of the downfall of labor organizing. Because you see it, there's a little bit of a drop off here, but they're, initially still sort of parallel for a hot minute. But like, man, especially once Reagan gets in there and start knocking heads. And yeah, unions sort of evaporated, so unfortunately. So yeah. Also it's actually from the same article, but similar graph that breaks it down into a little more specifics, right? Whereas the blue line here says, oh, well, productivity went up 100%. The actual wages went down 7% from 1973 to 2012. Pretty incredible.
That hurts, man.
Yeah. All right. Let's go to the factory. I think this is a pretty short section because it also has one of the most absolutely behemoth footnotes I've ever seen. It's
footnote though.
It's approximately 2 pages, like a 2-page long footnote, which is
dude, just what I'm saying, but it was actually interesting to read at least.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of skimmed it. I don't know. I didn't. I was like I think I was out of it during this section, but yeah, no, that's another not super crazy section. It's pretty straightforward. Honestly, section 5, I have like quite a few notes on, so I kind of want to get there sooner than later, so we are encroaching on the 2-hour mark. But yeah, he's talking about the factory system now. Got this visual of the mechanical automaton He does lay up, so to get it, he'll contrast here in the beginning. Excuse me, Yuri's view versus his own. Sorry, I guess they're both Yuri's description, but Marx will point out the difference, I should say. So he says that on one, this is Yuri, I think. So the factory, the automatic factory, is the combined cooperation of many orders of work, people, adult and young, intending with assiduous skill a system of productive machines continuously impelled by a central power, aka the prime mover. That's again like steam engine, electricity, whatever, powering the thing. And then also he says he calls it a vast automaton composed of various mechanical and intellectual organs, acting in an uninterrupted concert for the production of a common object, all of them being subordinate to a self-regulating moving force. He says that these are not identical, descriptions. He says the first one, the combined collective worker, appears as the dominant subject and the mechanical automaton as the object, but in the other, the automaton is the subject and the workers are the merely conscious organs, or coordinated with the conscious organs of the automaton. So he says the first description would be more applicable to every possible employment of machinery on a large scale. The second would be characteristic by its use of capital, therefore the modern factory system. So, Marx is basically saying Yuri is not great at identifying the differences here. But he says that he prefers to present the central machine from which the motion comes not only as an automaton, but as an autocrat. And in these spacious halls, the benign powers of steam summons around him his myriads of willing menials. So this is this is an interesting section, I think, to gloss over if you ever need like ammo for pointing out that like capitalism is inherently autocratic, because when it comes to the division of labor within the factory, the people doing the work are pretty much not supposed to think for like what about the greater process, right? That's not really their job. Typically I think Marx will call it like the capitalist, but even then I would actually say it's more like a project manager or project engineer probably actually thinks about what's happening on the factory floor, but they're just directly subordinate to whatever the capitalist needs them to do. And actually, I think in the first section, Marx, in one of the footnotes, Marx even talks about how like even Yuri himself like decried basically how scientifically illiterate most capitalists were, and because most of them are, right? I mean, shit. There's a reason that like business majors and engineering majors fucking hate each other, because it feels like the engineers actually know how all this shit works, and the business majors don't know absolutely anything, and yet, it seems like the engineers are going to end up working for the business majors anyways, despite them not knowing anything technical, which is frustrating. So, also speaking of engineers, he throws them in as part of an essential division of the factory system, basically saying that their main job is taking care of the machines, as opposed to the people, where he says they're educated, so they know what's happening scientifically, but also capable and can actually do it themselves. My addendum to that, again, in modern times, is that I think modern engineers much more likely to only be trained in the science like the science and sort of theory of how it all works, and that technicians would actually be the ones who actually fuck with the machinery. That is at least my experience. I'm sure it would depend on your field of engineering.
There's some overlap, but yeah, in general, I think that's even broken down more now.
Yeah, that's how I tend to think of it, is like engineers are paid to do the thinking and the technicians are paid to mess with machines. Take care of the machinery. Or build the machinery. Engineers might design the machinery in like a, CAD program, or if they're old school, they'll do it on like blueprints or whatever. But that doesn't mean that once they finish their design, that doesn't mean the engineer themselves is going to go in the workshop and start, banging out some big old chiller system. Like, no, they're going to send the blueprints to a factory or something, and the factory is going to build it. There's a bunch of technicians in there who use machines or just put it together themselves. I mean, eventually you're also going to need like other skilled laborers like welders, metal cutters, fabrication specialists, basically, right? To actually build the shit. Like, believe me, in engineering school, they do not teach you how to build shit. That is definitely true. That's one of the most
electrical engineering a little bit, but beyond that, no.
Shit. I feel like some of the most like one of my friends who's arguably one of the most incompetent people I've ever met was an electrical engineer. Like he could explain how the electronics worked, but he was next to useless if I ever was like, okay, but like, can you actually help me fix it? He's like, no. Just absolutely not.
Yeah, there are two types of electrical engineers.
Well, I was gonna say there's electrical engineers, but then there's electricians, electrical technicians, right? They're actually trained to like handle electrical systems and work on them and do the measurements and use a voltmeter and all that fun stuff. The electrical engineer is mostly playing on a computer and just like doing, math.
There's still practical elements of it where you do build out physical circuits, or at least if you're in a decent program. I like to say I wasted 2 years of my life in an electrical engineering program before the math caught up to me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I know that they definitely do have labs where they build circuitry and all that jazz, but usually that doesn't translate neatly. Especially, it doesn't. I don't know. I think if you're asking me, I would be much more comfortable. Like, I'm not electrical. Even if I were, I might still be more comfortable asking an electrician to deal with it first.
Yeah, I'm like I said, the practical elements of it were far more interesting and intuitive to me than the actual like sitting down and mathing things out. And so like, it's like, I'm sitting there, you want me to like, look at a circuit and try to figure out like what a circuit diagram and figure out what's going on and, maybe try to build something out. Fine. You ask me to like calculate the resistance across that circuit, and I'm gonna be like, I'm gonna look that up on the internet real quick.
Yeah. Oh, resistances suck. That math is so hard to do in your head.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Anyway, sorry. Off topic.
Oh, that's all good. Let's see, we got more page here. He says, thus, although, from a technical point of view, the old system of division of labor is thrown overboard by machinery, it hangs on in the factory as a tradition handed down from manufacture. It is then systematically reproduced and fixed in a more hideous form by capital as a means of exploiting labor power. Lifelong specialty of handling the same tool now becomes the lifelong specialty of handling, or serving the same machine. Machinery is misused in order to transform the worker from his very childhood into a part of a specialized machine. This way, not only are the expenses necessary for his reproduction considerably lessened, but at the same time his helpless dependence upon the factory as a whole, and therefore upon the capitalist, is rendered complete. Here, as everywhere else, we must distinguish between the increased productivity which is due to the development of the social process of production and that which is due to the exploitation by capitalists of that development. So I don't know about y'all, but I found this one to be a pretty interesting paragraph because, and I know David Harvey keeps hammering on about this, but this is one where it kind of stuck with me. So it's this idea that Marx is like, the machinery is misused, implying that it could be potentially correctly used if the social process of production were to be revolutionized. But man, I don't know. Like, it's slightly conflicting because the sentence right before that of this lifelong specialty of handling a tool now becomes a lifelong specialty of serving a machine. I was thinking to myself, like, well, even if we do have a socialist organization, you do have collective ownership of everything. Does that actually let us escape this almost subservience to the machinery that allows us to,
it revisits this in section 5 too.
Yeah, it's interesting to wrestle with because I think ideally, and even maybe it is section 5 where he, or maybe it's later on, but he talks about basically how if we could, oh no, it's like literally the next section, I think.
Yeah, it's 555 where essentially he's saying that like that the machine itself is morally neutral, and that it's basically the way that the machine itself is employed within productive society, shall we say, that makes the difference as to whether it's going to be a net social good or a net social bad. Because like he kind of, I think, because he talks about that like when he's talking about the Luddite movement.
Yeah, and I think this is also, I think it was right here. The separation of the intellectual faculties of the production process from manual labor, and the transformation of those faculties into powers exercised by capital over labor, is, as we have shown, finally completed by large-scale industry. So, I am wrestling with this thing and the issues basically that David Harvey's bringing up, right? Which is that, like, even in a socialist organization, we still are pretty reliant on machinery to do a lot of the work for us, and having like highly specialized labor to handle the machinery for us is still going to be required, I feel like, at least in the early stages. Now, having said that, when we get down here and he talks about the separation of the intellectual faculties of the production process from manual labor, is how capital can exercise its power over the workers, right? Because again, it's like capital's saying we don't even want you to think. We're going to do all the thinking for you. You just need to go do. And I think that prospect is still somewhat intimidating or like unappealing, because if you replace capital in this context with sort of like the economic plan, right? Let's say we do come up with some big old honkin' economic plan that we obey in order to make production happen. it's not a whole, like, I feel like the individual worker's experience is not going to be like that much different, especially in like factory work. But I think there is hopefully a lot of progress being made in basically the quote unquote AI development, especially recently, but it's still not. I know, like, the computer science theorists will be sure to say it's not true AI. We're not there yet. But the idea, I guess, would be like an inversion of this, is what I was thinking of, which is basically that, like, I think what AI right now can do is basically take input from people, interpret it in a way that is pretty close to how a person would interpret it, and then, respond somehow. Even if it's sort of a pre-programmed response. That's not bad, right? Because if we do replace a lot of we've already replaced a ton of manufacturing and manual labor, was what Marx calls it, with machine labor. That's already happened in a lot of industries, and there's still a lot of industries that haven't had that happen, but they easily could. But I think, intelligent, like, machine learning or AI, like, again, quote unquote AI, basically natural language systems that can interpret instructions and then carry them out. That's sort of what I'm calling AI in this case. That kind of technology could easily replace basically these quote unquote intellectual faculties, where now as a work, like, that hopefully opens up a lot of space for replacing tons and tons of labor. And the thing is, if, again, I hear what Marx is saying, right, which is this part at the end. He's basically saying that, yeah, if you do all that fun stuff, replacing the intellectual faculties with, like, simple AI, replacing your manual labor faculties with machines and robots, like, because soft robotics is also kind of popping off. Then yeah, you could replace a tremendous amount of labor, which sounds great unless you're in a capitalist system, right? Because if you're in the capitalist version of that hell, or I should say just in that system, then you are in hell. But if you are in the socialist version of that system, it sounds great.
In a capitalist iteration of it, it creates something horrific known as surplus populations. And we all know what bored capital does with surplus populations. It finds a way to make them useful. And by that, I mean usually a way to get a bunch of people killed for something really stupid.
Right. It's my mind went the same way. It's like, oh, just send them to war, I guess. But yeah, that's pretty much Marx's viewpoint on like machinery. He's pretty convinced, it sounds like, that the social relations are the determinant, and like how machinery influences our lives, pretty much.
And I think Harvey even pointed back to that sort of web of relations that he drew, like, kind of toward the beginning of chapter 15, his discussion on it, about how this is kind of one of those places where you have that interplay between, you have that dialectic between the social relation and the technology, and even to a certain extent, reproduction of daily life, process of production, etc. That you kind of basically you have to look at those social relations and how they're employed or not employed. to kind of get a sense of, you know, to kind of really get to the meat of the fact that it's not the machines that you really need to be upset about, it's how they're being used.
Yeah. And like I still think that is a, depending on your audience, if you're, you know, if you're in that process of trying to persuade people to be more accepting of socialist ideas on this type of stuff, this is a pretty interesting place to start. And like I said, I think it might depend on your audience, but I personally have found it is actually pretty compelling if people are really into the AI of it all. Because they, you know, I would not blame someone if they thought that, oh, this AI stuff sounds really despotic and like, you know, dystopian. Because it's replacing all this human labor that's, you know, relatively simple. And I would say that, like, yeah, it is dystopian so long as you are in a capitalist system. But even if you don't start out that, like, you know, maybe start more simple and say, like, man, it's weird that all this really great technology we have ends up making our lives worse instead of better. You know, what's up with that? It's pretty crazy, right? Just sort of tease it out. See if you can. It's sort of like the right. You can't force like a horse to drink water, but you can lead it to the water or something like that.
Yeah, you can lead a horse to water,
but you can't make it drink.
Okay, maybe that's not a good analogy then. But you at least start by leading the horse to the water. Maybe that's a good way of saying it.
Yeah.
Whether they drink or not, I guess it'll depend. But at least bring them to the water.
Some people, you can lead them right there. They will land right on the point and still refuse to acknowledge its relevance.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true.
Because then they're going to be like, oh, well, what about this, though? What about that, though? You know, and sometimes it takes a little extra time for that idea to kind of like lodge in their brain and start growing. You're never going to be successful to get anybody to agree with you on the first try. But if you can kind of lead them to the thought, and if they kind of get there on their own, they'll keep thinking about it.
Yeah, actually, in the most recent episode of the podcast and JT's most recent video, they like remind me of an argument I had with a friend of mine over essentially like the planning question, right? Where I was trying to explain to him like, I was trying to even explain to him in like a very simplified Richard Wolff type of way of like, let's just take it a really simple case study of like a co-op, like how that would work, of like, you know, democratically deciding how to do things. And of course he's being like super obstinate and being like, well, that would be crazy inefficient and like they wouldn't survive in the market. I'm like, well, that's why we don't have fucking markets. You know? And I'm like, that's also why you wouldn't have competition. You'd have cooperation between, you know, fucking enterprises and stuff like that. It was so funny because his retort was essentially, oh, but in a corporation you have like a plan that comes from the top and, you know, gets filtered down through the hierarchy and everyone does their job according to the plan. And I was like, bitch, you just used my argument against me. Like, what are you talking about?
You completely missed the point.
Well, no, I was like, dude, that's literally what I'm describing. What you just said is what I'm describing. Except instead of 5 fucking rich idiots who are out of touch calling the shots, everybody pitches in for the decision making. And he's like, nope, that would never work. That would never work. I'm just like, dude, the cognitive dissonance is like off the charts. Like, come on. Yeah, it's pretty wild because it this is also the type of person who is like married to the idea of electoralism, right? That for some reason 300 million people can make democratic decisions that, by the way, have like next to no chance of actually happening.
Oh, there's actually a really fun research paper about that came out from, I think it was MIT or Stanford, basically stating that.
I thought it was Princeton, but yeah, it was one of the Ivy Leagues.
It's one of the big ones.
Yeah. No, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, it's something like it's
96+%. It is absurdly minimal.
Yeah, 96% of like policy positions that people vote for don't get implemented or something like that. Even when they are actually voted on.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my point though. Is like the cognitive dissonance of being like, oh yes, democracy works on this like absolutely huge scale, even though the evidence is completely I should say not only on a large scale, but in specifically a bourgeois republic, but the idea of like, oh, that makes perfect sense, right? It makes sense that 150 million people could like make decisions together for a country, and then we'll just trust these 150 people to do it for us. Whereas a firm of like a couple thousand people doing the exact same thing is just unreasonable. It's like, dude, the cognitive dissonance is pretty legendary. Like I said, it's like Olympic level mental gymnastics.
Yep. Americans are the most propagandized people on Earth. And the rest of the West is not terribly far behind.
I think the only reason they're not behind is because they at least can make fun of America.
Yeah, that's.
All right, so section 5 here. Well, actually, extra footnote again. Okay, struggle between work and machine. All right, so he's actually starting out with existence of the capital relation itself. It rages throughout the period of manufacture, but only since the introduction of machinery has the worker fought against the instrument of labor itself, capital's material mode of existence. Actually, this is like one of the clearest instances of Marx delineating capital as a social relation versus capital as machinery, right? And I like the analogy I would point to is earlier in the book when we talk about the value relation, right? Because value is a social relation, but the material existence of value is money, right? Can't touch and feel and measure a social relation very easily, so you need some material way of manifesting it in the real world, and that would be money. Capital, in this case, capital is a social relation between capitalists and laborers, workers, but capital's material mode of existence is the means of production. In this case, we're talking specifically about the machinery part of the means of production. Okay. So he's talking about the worker here is in revolt against this particular form of the means of production because it is the material foundation of the capitalist mode of production. So it's sort of pointing out that like it's the idea, like going back to that quote from Marx where he's like, if everything appeared as it were on the surface, there'd be no need for science, right? I think this is another case of that, where you've got the Luddites, for example, but he gives other examples in the paragraph of workers like revolting against the machinery, and the means of production themselves, because they're almost there, right? Like the horse is at the water. Like they're like, oh, I almost get it. I kind of understand that all this stuff is owned by the capitalist is paying me, and I'm getting fucked over. But it might just, they kind of miss the mark slightly, and they say, oh well, let's just destroy the machines. That'll stick it to them. Basically, instead of realizing that in actuality it's the capitalists they should probably destroy. So he says, again, like at the end of this paragraph, large-scale destruction of machinery which occurred in the English manufacturing districts during the first 15 years of the 19th century, largely as a result of the employment of the power loom, was known as the Luddite movement, gave the anti-Jacobin government composed of such people as blah 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 a pretext for the most violent and reactionary measures. It took both time and experience before the workers learned to distinguish between machinery and its employment by capital, and therefore to transfer their tax from the material instruments of production to the form of society which utilized those instruments. All right, so he's talking about the history of the Luddite movement, saying, well, they had a good instinct of like, okay, let's attack the machines, but that instinct eventually developed into a little bit more class consciousness, and they said, oh, actually, not the machines that are really doing anything. They can't do anything by themselves. It's the fucking capitalists that we should actually be worried about. So that's good to see. And by the way, that's pretty much what we're talking about, right? In all these articles about like, oh, is AI super dangerous? Like, think of the AI as just another machine. It's just another technology. And right now, a lot of people are fear mongering about it because they have lots of reasons, but it could be just simple misunderstanding. They don't know what it means. But I think there is the implicit understanding, because everyone lives in a capitalist society. They know how capitalism works. They've internalized it, even if they don't, consciously think about it very much. So they know, everybody knows that as so long as we're in a capitalist system, that technology is bad news, basically.
It will be used to basically collapse carrying capacity for human labor in whatever it can be used in.
Exactly. Yeah, everyone knows it's bad news and is like, ooh, I'm scared. And that's exactly how the Luddites responded, right? It's this new technology, you don't know what it's about, but you kind of have internalized that every time new technology gets introduced, our lives get shittier. So it's this almost like Pavlovian response, right? It's like this primal instinct of like, oh, that thing bad because that's happening.
In the Luddites' case, it was because they knew what would happen. It was being used to replace skilled artisans.
They didn't need evidence. They were literally getting laid off by the thousands. So it's like, it wasn't shocking. But
no, it was exactly what it was.
Even in the, I guess that would have made, my analogy makes more sense with the AI, where it hasn't been full scale implemented yet. But you get my point. Right. It's like people fearmonger about technology because they know it has the potential to make their lives worse.
Right. But I also feel like the concern here, at least from an angle that I see it most often, is similar to that of the Luddites, that you have skilled artisans, or in this case, like visual artists or writers,
graphic designers too.
Graphic designers, yeah, who basically are concerned that, people aren't going to hire them to do work, or people aren't going to buy their art because they could just go to an AI generator, put in a prompt for exactly what they want, run a couple of iterations, and get something that's, that's good enough. And maybe they only have to pay for the subscription to the AI service, or maybe they use a free service and don't have to pay anything at all. And so it really does depress, at least what the market value is, at least nominally, of visual art, of graphic design, of even copywriting to a degree.
How about just like
yeah,
also like customer support?
Yeah.
I mean, shit.
I mean, lots of things. Where you do have people who have a skill, and customer support is definitely a skill. And suddenly it's made to a degree redundant, or at least a lot cheaper by AI. And so, yeah, I mean, it's basically the wheel turning, and it's the exact same concern of the Luddites.
Right.
That's not really the technology. The technology itself is neutral, but it's the way that it's being used and the way that it's perceived as a cost-saving measure by capitalists, and even just kind of your average person, your average consumer to a degree, as a way to save a little bit of money. And so even if you're just looking at like your average consumer, like somebody who, I don't know, wants a piece of art for their wall, or somebody who maybe just wants to cut a corner on their own work, and instead of hiring a subcontractor, they use an AI. It's even, it can be even more of a one-to-one thing, but even then, the concern is not so much that the AI is the problem. It's basically the way that these social relations have been, to a degree, tainted by capitalism, and by that always wanting to look for, the cheapest way to do things so that you can keep more of whatever meager scraps you manage to earn.
Yeah. What also it brings to mind for me is I'm sure some of you have seen these memes, right, where you see the memes having to do with like, oh, socialists, leftists, communists, whatever. They're super annoying because we will point to anything wrong in the world and be like, it's because of capitalism. And that can be aggravating for people who don't know what the fuck we're talking about. But like,
but it's not untrue.
It's like it's like, well,
you're sitting here like, it literally is.
Yeah, because like a lot of the point boils down to like the thing that we're talking about. The thing in itself isn't bad, quote unquote. It's the social relation which is inherently exploitative that is bad. And the fact that social relation is baked into fucking everything means, it is capitalism, but all the time, everywhere.
Yeah, I mean,
that's why we sound fucking crazy sometimes, but it's like, that's the point.
Because I mean, it's just like, think of AI being introduced, in a world where the concept of a starving artist didn't exist. Because if you wanted to be an artist, great, be an artist, make shit, you can still afford to, have a home and have food, and, because like, because society cares about art existing.
Right. And I would say this also applies to other social relations that we are generally across the board against, right? Like you could do a similar thing with like patriarchy, for example. Patriarchy is just another name for like another set of social relations which are highly negative. And because that's the thing, right? We can point at like something that we're like, oh, this is like oh, this is toxic masculinity. It's like, well, the actual activity may not be toxic inherently. It's made toxic due to the social relation called patriarchy, right? That's like the nitty gritty of it. You got to pull back the curtain and be like, I'm talking about the Wizard of fucking Oz back, right? Not the projection of this scary thing. That's not what I'm worried about. I'm worried about the dude behind the curtain, sort of. I don't know. That's sort of the metaphor.
Yeah. It's like the again going back to Marx's, if things were just the way that they appear on the surface, you wouldn't need science. That you can't just look at the surface interaction or the surface existence of a thing. You have to look at why it is the way that it is.
I would say
Or why it's there.
it's even more true in social science.
Yeah.
Because sometimes in physical sciences you can get pretty close to the correct answer if you're just like, yeah, it looks like this thing is happening. Like sometimes you might be right, but in social sciences, it's usually almost without fail far more complicated than it probably seems.
Yeah, there's almost always a systemic reason why anything is the way that it is. And that systemic reason may be obvious, or you may think you found the systemic reason, but if you dig a little bit deeper, even that systemic reason has a systemic reason. And it's just, systems with control all the way down.
Yep. And that's pretty, by the way, that's why Marx landed on a critique of capitalism as the foundation for his critique of everything existing. Because he determined, he's like, man, I can't really get much more basic than social production. Like, how do human beings keep themselves from dying? How do we feed ourselves? How do we house and clothe ourselves? He's like, it doesn't get much more fucking basic than that. So let's start there. That's pretty much where he started with this. I mean, literally, the book starts with the commodity, right? Because that's what we're talking about.
Yep.
Okay, let's speed through the rest of this because it's already getting late as fuck. All right. Machinery causes more misery among workers who compete with it. But the transition is rapid. The effect is acute and is felt by a great mass of people. World history offers no spectacle more frightful than the gradual extinction of the English handloom weavers. It is a tragedy dragged on for decades. Finally coming to an end in 1838. Many of them died of starvation and vegetated with their families for 2.5 days. So sad times on the OK Corral. No, wait. Oh, sorry, this is later in this paragraph. Yeah. In any case, since machinery is continually seizing on new fields of production, its temporary effect is really permanent. Hence, the character of independence from and estrangement towards the worker, capitalist mode of production gives to the conditions of labor and to the product of labor, develops into a complete and total antagonism with the advent of machinery. It is therefore when machinery arrives on the scene that the worker for the first time revolts savagely against the instruments of labor. So yeah, that's Marx's summary of basically what we've been talking about. Sort of what drives a worker to start smashing machinery. Let's go tables here. Okay. But machinery does not act as a superior competitor to the worker, always on the point, making him superfluous, is a power inimical to him, as capital proclaims this fact loudly and deliberately, as well as making use of it. It is the most powerful weapon for suppressing strikes, those periodic revolts of working class, it's the autocracy of capital. And what's this guy saying that the steam engine was the first antagonist to human power? And yeah, I
feel like that's the if you pay fast food workers $15 an hour, or they're going to be all replaced with self-service kiosks and robots. Like, you don't want that, do you? You don't want your job to be given to a robot. You'd be happy with the $9 an hour we're paying you.
Exactly. And this is also, by the way, where it brings up that imagery again, as capital is a real god. It's like these people are saying that God will smite you if you pay these people too much. It's like, no. You, the fucking capitalists, are the ones doing this. Not some alien entity. Like, let's not get it twisted. You motherfuckers are responsible for replacing them with machines and like self-checkout kiosks and all that jazz. Don't blame it on some like act of God. Like, that also is very frustrating. Is, you know, with that sort of capital as a god mentality, is when capitalists and conservatives in general will just blame like horrendous things happening that are directly caused by capital, and they blame it more on just like it was inevitable. And I mean, in some ways, like, we understand why it's inevitable because that's how capital operates, but they don't see that as a negative, right? They see that as just like capital is this force of nature. The markets are just a force of nature. Like, you can't do anything. Oh, you know, as soon as we raise wages, yeah, just fucking fire all of them and get checkout machines.
The invisible hand.
And by the way, sometimes they'll use machinery, but they've also, and I know I'd mentioned this right at the start, they've also just blatantly threatened to like send jobs overseas. And guess what? They actually do that all the time. So,
you know, just to loop back around, or literally replace them with children who they can pay less.
Yeah, exactly. Nowadays, when people are saying, hey, I don't want these jobs because you're not fucking paying enough and everything's too expensive. And they're like, oh, that's too bad. Well, how about your kids? We'll take them instead. Because I'm sure a kid would love $10 an hour. Yeah, it's pretty fucked up, for sure.
Old is new again.
Right. And then last thing I think I'll go over is some last minute dunking on Yuri, because why not? He says, although Yuri's work appeared in 1835, at a time when the factory system was still comparatively little developed, it remains the classical expression of the spirit of the factory. Not only because, I wanted to read the quote right before. Okay, sorry. This is Yuri on the self-acting mule. I don't even know what this means. This is just like a fucking, I didn't look this up. What the fuck is a self-acting mule? Is it just like a steam engine or something?
Probably something like that. Something that probably drives a mill or something.
Yeah, I was like, it sounds like an old-timey way of saying like a car or like a tractor. I don't know. Anyways, I say, this is from Yuri, I think. A creation destined to restore order among the industrious classes. This invention confirms the great doctrine already propounded, that when capital enlists silence into her service, the refractory hand of labor will always be taught docility. In other words, this is how technology, machinery, etc. can be used as docility is a very, very nice way of saying basically suppression, essentially, or especially like a very forceful suppression of resistance to getting your jobs replaced with machines. And so this is Marx responds to this by saying, although Yuri's work appears in 1835, when the factory system is still little developed, it remains the classical expression of the spirit of the factory, not only because of its undisguised cynicism, but also because of the naivete with which it blurts out the thoughtless contradictions of the capitalist brain. which I thought was a nice little smackdown there. And I think right at the end here, because this is just a bunch of quotes from Yuri. Let's see. On the other hand, this same dispenser of consolation defends the lowness of the children's wages on the ground that it prevents parents from sending their children into the factory at too early an age. The whole of his book is a vindication of a working day of unrestricted length. That Parliament should forbid children of 13 years of age to be exhausted by 12-hour working days. 12 hours a day reminds his liberal soul of the darkest days of the Middle Ages. This does not prevent him from calling upon the factory workers to thank Providence, which by means of machinery has given them the leisure to think of their mortal interests. So, yeah. Talking that mad shit on Yuri. So
I did look it up. Self-acting mule, it's a more automated process for spinning fibers into like thread and yarn and stuff.
I wouldn't be surprised if it did use steam power. That would seem reasonable.
Yeah.
That's right, because that's right. He did explain how like where the term horsepower comes from. It's literally because a horse was like spinning a wheel or something to run a factory.
Yeah.
That's really funny to think about, by the way. Like an entire factory is 1 horsepower. Anyways. Okay. Let me kill the recording.